What's up guys, Alton from MicroGrinder Poker School here. In today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about poker theory. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at equity and expected value, and we're going to see how those change in specific scenarios when we're playing against anywhere from one opponent up to 9 opponents. So if you're interested in learning about that or seeing what I found out in my little bit of research, stay tuned because that's what we're going to talk about today. Hey guys, welcome to today's video. For those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Alton Harden. I'm the founder of MicroGrinder Poker School and this YouTube channel, and we're all about turning beginning and struggling poker players into solid winning poker players through sound fundamentals. So if you guys are new to this channel, if you haven't subscribed, please consider hitting that subscribe button down there and subscribing. But without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get into today's video. What's going on guys? So for those of you that have been watching my videos for quite some time, you're going to notice I don't have glasses anymore. So for me personally, while I'm recording this video, when I'm looking at the screen, it's kind of weird looking because I'm used to seeing myself with glasses when I'm looking in the video. So I don't know if it's weird for you guys, but it looks kind of weird for me. But anyways, let's talk about today's video. So doing some research and getting feedback from people that are pre-reading and providing comments on my book, I got the idea for this video. So what I did is I looked at expected value, equity, and I looked at specific hands versus specific calling ranges, and I wanted to see how the number of players affected not only equity, but also affected value with specific hands where we're raising pre-flop to 3 big blinds and they're calling 3 big blinds. And so what I did is I took specific hands, I took higher equity hands like ace queen, ace jack, king queen. I took medium to small pocket pairs, I think pocket sevens and pocket fours, and then I took a suited connector and a suited ace, and I compared them versus a specific calling range, and I wanted to look at equity and expected value where the money goes in pre-flop, there's no more betting post-flop, to see how the number of players would affect equity and expected value. So I did that, I put in some considerations, and I want to share that with you. This is kind of my research and my analysis on this. By no means is it a conclusion, but I just want to share this with you guys to give you guys an idea of how the number of players can affect our equity and our expected value with different types of hands. So let's go ahead, let's jump over to my computer screen and let's talk about that. Alright guys, so now we're looking at my computer screen, and if you're not watching this video in full screen mode, pause your video, put it in 1080p, and make it full screen because these font sizes are really small, and if you try viewing this in anything other than full screen mode in 1080p, you're not going to be able to see these numbers. So what you're looking at here is you're looking at a spreadsheet that I put together, and what I did is I took a specific hand, so for example ace queen off, I put it against a specific calling range, and let me pull that up. Here's that calling range, a fairly liberal calling range that excludes pocket queens, pocket kings, pocket aces, and ace king suited because those are pretty standard 3-bet hands. I wanted to keep it fairly conservative with that, but I also wanted to keep the calling range significantly wide, and I guess we won't call this significantly wide, but it's fairly wide for a calling range. So I took specific hands against specific calling ranges, and what I did is I used Equilab, and for example I put ace queen in, let's put ace queen offsuit against this calling range, and what I did is I evaluated the equity. So for example, here's the equity versus one opponent, and then what I did is continue to add it on versus more and more opponents until we got all the way down to 9 different opponents. And what we did here, what I specifically did is I put in our basic EV calculation. EV is equal to the amount that we win times the percentage that we win minus the amount that we lose times the percentage that we lose. And I wanted to see with specific hands how the number of players not only affected our equity, which is our win percentage, but also our expected value of each play with this hand as we face more and more opponents. So the way I looked at this is I assumed we raised 3 big blinds pre-flop and we got called by our opponent. Now there's no post-flop consideration at all because there's, I believe, 16,900 unique potential flops for unique situations, not including all sorts of permutations of 9 different players having different starting hands, but just the flop alone, once you know your hand, there's 16,900 different flops. So it'd be very difficult to look at a wide variety of flops. Instead, it's a lot easier just to look at the pre-flop equity and look at the EV in terms of there's no more betting occurring post-flop. So people put money in pre-flop and they put the flop, the turn in the river, and it goes to showdown and the best hand wins. Now, if we start talking about post-flop considerations and post-flop equity and post-flop expected value after there's bets and raises and all those different things and people folding out their hands where everything starts to change, equity changes, expected value changes, then this gets very, very dynamic. This is a very simplistic way to look at it. And I only use a standard 3 big blind raise sizing. You could, in fact, do, let's assume I raise all in and everybody calls all in, but that's really not as realistic. It's more realistic that somebody raises with these hands and we get callers. And it gives us a general idea before we go to the flop how often we expect to win before we get to the flop. But then once we get to the flop, with those 16,900 potential flops, everything kind of changes as people bet, people raise, people fold, and they fill out their equity share. We gain some of their equity share, and so forth. So anyways, getting back to what I was doing, is this is our basic EV calculation. And I always start with 1 opponent, and then I went to 2, 3, all the way down to 9. So we always lose 3 big blinds because that's what we're investing. And the amount we win is the amount that our opponents put into the pot. So we lose 3, but against 1 opponent, we gain 3. Against 9 opponents, we lose 3, but there's a potential to gain 9 times 3, which is 27 big blinds. And so that's how I did this. So with ace-queen offsuit, for example, against 1 opponent, we expect to win 61.11% of the time. And so in terms of our big blinds, in terms of the amount that we profit over the long run, this is plus EV because over the long run, we expect to profit 0.66 big blinds over the long run against a single opponent with this calling range. And so what I did is I looked at that with ace-queen off, ace-queen suited, ace-jack off, ace-jack suited, king-queen suited, king-queen off, king-jack offsuit, king-jack suited, pocket 7s, pocket 4s, 7-6 suited, and ace-5 suited. And the goal is to look at the starting expected value against 1 opponent and see how it changes as we add in more opponents. Now, what you're going to find, regardless of the hand, is that your equity is going to decline as more people enter the pot. So we're going to have diminished equity as more people enter the pot. It's just, it's just a fact. Because as more people enter the pot, everybody has an equitable chance of winning the pot, right? They have a statistical probability where they're going to win the pot based upon the range and their position and everything else. So when somebody enters the pot, then they're going to take their portion of the equity out of 100% total, piece of a pie. They're going to take their portion. Our equity is going to decline. So we see, for example, with ace-queen offsuit, we start with 61%. It goes down to roughly 6.5%. Ace-queen suited, we start with just under 63%, and we go down to 9.65%. And so what you're going to notice some different trends with different hands. Certain hands, the starting EV versus 1 opponent is going to be negative, and then it's going to increase as more people enter the pot because the pot size is bigger. Other hands are going to start with a higher expected value against 1 opponent, and they may increase or it may just start to decline. And this is very situational. So I use a fairly significant calling range, and our equity and expected value is going to be based upon our opponent's calling ranges. We could give them all sorts of different calling ranges. Each opponent could have a different calling range, and the numbers are going to change. But just to keep it standard, I just kept everybody at this, even though this really isn't realistic, but it's good enough for an example for us to do here. So what we want to look at here is we have different types of hands. We have what I like to call higher equity hands, ace, king, ace, queen. These are hands, especially the offsuited hands, that rely on their ability to make top pair and win with top pair. Suited hands, such as ace-queen suited, ace-jack suited, king-queen suited, not only can they make top pair, but they can make flushes as well. And of course, both of them can make straights. But you'll notice that there's a bit of a drastic difference from off-suited and suited hands in terms of how their expected value changes and also the equity changes. Then I looked at our medium and small pocket pairs as well, and then also our suited connector and our small suited aces. Suited connectors, of course, great implied odds hands because we can make straights, flushes, two pairs. Ace 5 suited, same thing. We can, ace 5 suited down to ace 2 suited, we can make the wheel, we can make a flush for the ace high flush, and we can also make ace high to win some hands and also two pair. So these hands are quite diverse, and a lot of people say that we should play these against a lot of opponents. So I wanted to look at that versus other people say that hands like these that rely on top pair, especially the off-suited hands, we should be playing against a smaller amount of opponents because they don't retain their equity and their expected value decreases as they face more opponents. So I want to take a look at that. And pocket sevens and pocket fours, people say they kind of fall into the same area as these because they turn into cent mining hands, so they're implied odd hands. So let's take a look. Now, some considerations before we look at all these different tabs. I put these considerations down here. So consideration number one, these equity and EV calculations assumes there is no additional post-flop play past the pre-flop bets and the hands go to showdown. But in reality, not all hands go to showdown, so that's where this isn't realistic. Not all hands go to showdown, and in reality, when we're not all in pre-flop, there is going to be post-flop play where equity and expected value starts to deviate from these numbers that we see. Consideration number two, post-flop play is highly dynamic, which is what I kind of just pointed to. So that greatly affects equity and EV as people start betting, raising, and folding. Equity is going to drastically change, which is really going to change our EV as well because the bet sizings also affect that. Consideration number three, certain hands are easier to play against a single opponent and then multiple opponents. So a hand that relies on top pair is going to be a lot easier to play against one opponent than against 9 opponents, especially on a bad board texture. For example, maybe there's a 3 flush or 4 straight. Maybe we have top pair and we don't have a hand that improves us to a straight or flush. Makes it a lot more difficult. So there's certain hands that play better against single opponents than multiple opponents. Hands like these, typically people say 7-6 suited, ace 5 suited, implied odds hands, suited 1 gappers, small to medium pocket pairs. Those are hands that people like to play multi-ways and are also our suited broadways that give us the ability to make some really strong flushes and flush draws, play well multi-ways. But Broadway hands that are off-suited, people typically have been told that they play better against a single opponent. So we'll look at that. We'll look at this information and see if that holds true or not. Number 4, positional advantage equates to easier equity realization, whereas positional disadvantage often leads to more difficulty in our equity realization. So again, the power of position. When we're in position, we tend to realize our equity a lot better. And when we bluff, we can even overrealize our equity than what we should be able to realize. Conversely, when we're out of position, it's much harder for it to realize our equity. So we tend to have an under realization of our equity than we should. Consideration number 5. Hands that rely on top pair are more difficult to play in multi-way pots, whereas speculative hands gain from multi-way pots, i.e. better pot odds and better implied odds. So that's the considerations. So let's take a look at these hands. Let's start with ace queen offsuit and ace jack offsuit. So what you're going to find with both of these hands is that against one opponent, they both start, and I have the starting point as listed as red or green to tell us against one opponent if it's going to be plus EV right off the start, it's going to be dark green or dark red. And then down below, if it increases in equity, we put a light green. If it decreases in equity, we put a light red. So with both of these hands against one opponent, they have an equity edge favorite against this calling range, so they expect to win against one opponent. Now, if we start adding on opponents against 2 opponents, we gain a little bit of equity with ace-queen offsuit. So against 2 opponents, our equity increases a bit. For ace-jack offsuit, it actually decreases a bit. It's still profitable, but it starts to decline. And so we look at this, it continues to decline, and then it becomes minus EV against 4 opponents with this calling range. If we look at ace-queen offsuit, Again, we're still making money, but it's starting to decline when we face 3 or 4 opponents. And by the time we get to 5 opponents, it's not nearly as profitable as the beginning. And then against 6, we start losing money. So you'll notice with this one, it's profitable. It increases a bit against 2, and then it starts to slope downwards and decline to the point where it's unprofitable. Ace-Jack offsuit, it's profitable, but against 2 opponents, it's still profitable, but it starts to decline even against 2 opponents, and against 4, with this calling range, it becomes unprofitable and minus EV. Now, let's take a look at these and compare these to their suited counterparts, right? Because it's suited, it should play better against multiple opponents, should retain its equity a bit more. If we look at ace-queen suited versus ace-queen off, it has a higher equity percentage against 1 opponent, so it's definitely going to be more profitable than this one. So we should assume that it's going to retain more equity. And in fact, if we look at it against 2, 3, 4, and even 5 opponents, the equity increases. So the equity increases from where it was against even 1 opponent. So we get an increase in equity, but then it starts to decline against 6 opponents. And even against 8 opponents, it's still profitable, and then it's slightly unprofitable against 9 opponents. So this kind of shows us that being suited has some benefits versus being offsuited with the same exact hand. And we should notice a similar trend with ace-jack offsuit. Again, more profitable than its offsuited counterpart, gains a little bit equity against 2 opponents, more so than it does, not equity, sorry, expected value goes up a little bit than against 1 opponent, but then the expected value starts to decline to the point by the time when we get to 9 opponents, it's just slightly unprofitable. So both of these, ace-jack suited and ace-queen suited, the expected value is profitable all the way from 1 player to 8 players. But we see a bit of a slope where the equity increases and it starts to decline as more people go in. With both of these, ace-jack offsuit and ace-queen offsuit, once they face 2 opponents here and 3 opponents here, the equity starts to decline. And by the time we get to 4 opponents, it's unprofitable because we have a minus EV situation with ace-jack offsuit. And then by the time we get to 6 opponents, it's minus EV with ace-queen offsuit. So our considerations do tend to hold true. The ace-queen suited and ace-jack suited is going to retain more equity. It's going to play better against more opponents than the ace-queen and ace-jack offsuit. So it does hold true. But none of them are going to be profitable against an entire table full of opponents. Now let's take a look at king-queen. So we'll look at king-queen and king-jack. We'll look at the offsuited and the suited portion. And this is interesting because the way that the equity changes a bit with these, for me, was a bit unexpected. So with king-queen off and king-jack off, against this calling range, it's actually minus EV against 1 opponent. So both of them are minus EV, but then once we start to add in opponents, because the amount of money that's in the pot and our equity doesn't seem to decline that much, it becomes slightly plus EV. So it increases a bit, but then it starts to decline. And the numbers here are kind of all over the place with this one. It declines, it goes back up, declines a little, declines, continues to decline to the point where against 8 opponents, it's unprofitable. With king-jack off, we actually never show a profit, but the equity actually increases. So it's minus EV against 1 opponent all the way to 9, but we're at minus 0.2 big blinds for expected value. Then it goes up a little bit. We get close to it being break even. Then it drops back down. So this is interesting because if we look at that and we look at this, it's kind of a bit counterintuitive. That if we look at ace-jack offsuit versus this increases in equity a bit. It gains value for more people being in the hand. And I to be honest, against this range, I don't know exactly why this does and this doesn't, but it does. If we look at king-queen suited and king-jack off, or king-jack suited, now we notice that suitability, meaning that it's suited hands, allows it to retain a lot more equity and expected value is a lot better. So the EV increases all the way from 1 players all the way up to 9 players with king-queen suited with this calling range. Interesting because ace-queen suited doesn't. It actually loses money. So it's something to do with this calling range And it probably has to do with me eliminating a lot of these stronger aces off of here, making them 3-bets. That because there's a lot more weaker kings in here and a lot more weaker queens, that king queen and king jack are going to do a lot better against this range. If we put all these hands in here as a calling range, we probably see that ace queen and ace jack is probably going to have similar results to this. But because we took those out, turn them into 3-bets, then things kind of change a bit. So you'll notice here we start at 0.1 BB as our expected value, and it increases up a bit. But you notice it does plateau and it kind of goes back down. But all these are still over what we initially started with. And then this one, again, same thing. It increases a bit, kind of goes back down, but all these are above, except for the last one that's a little bit below. So again, suitability, it being suited really does help. I'm going to try to speed up because we're close to 20 minutes. Let's get to pocket 7s and pocket 4s. Interesting enough, pocket 7s, we're going to notice that it's almost a straight increase. So we go from 0.3 to 0.4 all the way up to 2.0 against this calling range, facing anywhere from 1 opponent up to 9. The more people are in the pot, the more money we expect to win. With pocket 4s, a smaller pocket pair, we're going to notice similar results. Against one opponent, it's minus EV. Against two opponents, it's a bit more minus EV, but then it starts to go back up as more people enter the pot. So these hands, what this tells me is that pocket 7s and pocket 4s, these are hands that play well in terms of their expected value, much more against more opponents. The more opponents are in the pot, the greater our implied odds are, and our direct pot odds to call pre-flop with the potential to set mine, and then post-flop implied odds to set mine as well. And then also if we get paid off when we hit our set, the more opponents are in the hand, the greater our implied odds to make more money post-flop when we make a set. Let's take a look at 7-6 suited and ace-5 suited. So again, we've been told these are speculative hands that play well in multi-way pots, but not as much in a heads-up or three-way pots. So let's look at 7-6 suited. Against one opponent, it's going to be minus EV. But you'll notice that even though it's still minus, the equity is increasing to the point where it increases, continues to increase, continues to continue, and continues to increase all the way to where it plays the best against 9 opponents. So the more opponents that it faces, the better it plays. Ace-5 suited, we're going to see the exact same thing or close to the same thing. So against one opponent, it's minus EV. The EV actually goes down a little bit against 2 opponents and 3 opponents, but then it starts to jump back up as more people enter the pot. It never gets to the point, and I don't know why I put these. Oh, I did put these at. I don't know why I put these as green. These red and greens a bit off, but you'll notice that it gets worse. It gets worse, and then it starts to get a little better. This actually, if I'm saying it's getting a little better, this should actually be listed as green. And so it gets to the point where it starts at 0.2, and against 9 opponents, it's 0.07% EV for the amount of big blinds that it's going to win. And so if we look at this one, these actually get better. So better, and then better and all the way through. So what does this tell us? Well, hands like these play better against more people. Hands like these play better against more people. So suited aces, such as ace-5 down to ace-2, suited connectors play better against more opponents. Small to medium pocket pairs tend to play better against more opponents. Hands like these, ace-queen, ace-jack, king-queen, king-jack, suited hands retain their equity a lot more versus more opponents than their off-suited counterpart. And so this kind of gives us some insight as to how these hands retain their equity and how their expected value is against one opponent or 2 or 3 or 4 all the way up to 9. Now, like I said, this doesn't really take any post-flop play into consideration. It just assumes somebody open raises and everybody calls, and at that point with Equilab, all the cards are run out to the river, and this is a percentage that we expect to win, and this is expected value if no more money goes into the pot post flop. So assume everybody just checks down post-flop. These are the results. So it's inconclusive in terms of a post-flop play because there's a lot of post-flop consideration that is listed down here. So we have to take all that into consideration. But this kind of gives us an idea, a very simplistic idea of how different hands play post-flop compared to their counterparts. So higher equity hands that are suited and off-suited, suited connectors, medium to small pocket pairs, those type of hands. And so I just kind of had the idea to do some deep dive analysis on this, and I did this today and last night, and I figured I'd share it with you guys just to give you guys some insight into what I found. And like I said, this is by no means conclusive. This is just some initial findings, but I wanted to share it with you guys for some food for thought. So anyways, hope you guys liked it. We're running long on this video. We're at 23 minutes, so I'm going to cut it short. Thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Well, that's going to conclude today's video. Hope you guys liked it. If you did, please hit that thumbs up for a like for the video. If you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button down there. Tell your friends, tell your family members, tell anybody else you know that plays poker. And if you guys like all the free content that I produce here on YouTube, check out my Patreon account down below in the description, because for as little as $1 per month, you can help support this YouTube channel and keep it going with this free content to help support me to provide you all this awesome free poker content. So thanks guys for watching. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in about a week or so with my next video. Take care.